Hi, everyone. Welcome to Talk Back. It's September 23rd, 2024, and I was just talking with my guest, Chris Rivers, who I'll introduce you in a second, that I think it's 6 weeks to Election Day starting tomorrow. Except if you're a Connecticut resident, we now have early voting starting, I think, October 21st. It's going to be an interesting thing to see how many people take advantage of that. So it's time to interview all of the political leaders who are trying to get elected on November 5th. And I'm very happy to have with us our local candidate for state representative, Chris Rivers, in the 48th district. House District. Hi, how are you today?
I'm doing great. How are you?
Okay, so here we are. You've got 6 weeks starting tomorrow. What does a candidate need to do in 6 weeks to get to that point where he can say, I won on November 5th?
So the next 6 weeks is really all about voter contact. And those of us who are running campaigns, we'll call it door knocking, we'll do phone banking, advertisements will go up. It's all about reaching out to voters. And what I do differently than most other candidates is typically candidates will say it's about getting our message out, getting people bought into an image or a message or a narrative. And I like to really prioritize door knocking because I would rather spend most of my time listening, because I think one of the biggest problems we have in politics these days is not enough of our political leaders genuinely want to listen to all of their constituents, those that agree, those that disagree, whatnot. And so the next 6 weeks for me will continue to really be all about listening and getting my message out in equal parts.
Yeah, so that's so interesting. Because on the national and state level, the campaigns are pretty much run on the airwaves, right? Or they run in airline hangars, right? Or train stations or whatever, and they don't really get that one-on-one with the people, every so. But on the local level, you get to talk to people who are actually in your district, who you're going to help with legislation when you get to the State House in Hartford, right?
That's right.
So you want to be a state representative representing the towns in the 48th district. Give us an idea of what that district encompasses.
So the towns are all of Colchester, all of Basra, all of Franklin, and about 2/3 of Lebanon. And the way I would describe this district is pretty evenly split. We have Colchester that has a long history of agriculture and certainly has farms and whatnot, but we still have, especially in recent couple past decades, a lot of people moving in that live in Colchester, work elsewhere, and we have some amazing businesses in Colchester. The other towns, Basra, Franklin, and Lebanon, are mostly, I would identify as more pure farming, agricultural communities. One of the largest egg farms in Connecticut is in Basra. You have these amazing dairy farms all throughout. And so it's a really interesting mix across the board. But I think a lot of the people who I've been talking to, and I've knocked on about 4,000 doors to this point, and we'll try to do about another 4,000 doors, all sort of care about the same sorts of things.
How many people are in each state representative district?
It's somewhere in the neighborhood of 25-ish thousand people.
Okay, so that's a lot of people, and you can only reach about how many are you going to reach in the next 6 weeks out of 25,000 people?
I will genuinely try to reach about 8,000 doors, and that will be about, depending on how many people are home at a given time, 10,000 people.
So, over the years, I've always worked in politics, making calls on election day, on the days before, and I've noticed a certain coarseness, a certain greater nastiness, a lack of cooperation amongst people who just don't want to be bothered. Are you finding that people are welcoming you at the doors and are inviting you to talk with them and are giving you their thoughts about the kind of things you should do?
Definitely. And what I've noticed at the doors, this run in particular, is a lot of people are really concerned or interested, at least, in what is going on at all level of government. I have not had anyone say, I don't want to talk to you, this doesn't concern me. I have had people say, I am just working too hard, I don't have time to think about it. But I haven't had anyone say, whatever it is, I don't want anything to do with it. People are genuinely interested, and I think the state of politics at every level, there's good reason to be interested, because as Tim Waltz has said in a video that's gone somewhat viral, politics is interested in you. It shapes so much of our life.
Right. And we don't seem to grasp is that we're always so fixated on the national election, the
Right.
president,
Yep.
the senators, congressmen. But so much of our daily lives are controlled by what kind of legislation we have in our towns and in our state legislature, right?
That's right.
Why do you think people don't kind of get that and don't vote as much in as high numbers for the local offices as they do for the state and national? Why do you think that is?
I think it's a function of social media making everything that's national and international feel really close to home. I think it's a function of how much money is spent at the national level. Here in Connecticut, at the state level, we have really strong campaign finance laws that only allows us to spend so much per race, which really is a good thing because it incentivizes candidates like me to go stop fundraising and go talk to
More
voters.
on the ground, right?
Whereas a presidential race, and this one is going to be historic, I think 4 years ago, billions of dollars were spent, and it's hard to break out of that amount of money and advertisement and
Right.
everything else. And I think it just overshadows a lot of the
Right.
narrative we have.
But it helps you being on, when you're on the Democratic ticket,
Right.
And you're trying to defeat someone who now sits in that seat you want, who happens to be a Republican.
Right.
So you're on one of the toward the end of the line, but still, a lot of people still like to vote a solid ticket, blue down the way, right?
No.
So in a sense, that kind of helps you a bit that you have good people that are running in the offices above you on the line, right?
That helps. And I also think it's all candidates, any party that can produce strong candidates all the way up and down the ballot helps each other.
Okay.
So my district, I get to run on the same ticket as Joe Courtney, super popular out here in Eastern Connecticut, has done a lot for our region. That helps, but also the amount of doors I'm knocking will help Joe out as well, and the same could be said at the top of the ticket.
So why do we need to elect you and send the person who now has that seat back home?
So I think it really boils down to two major things. One is the sort of work a state rep should be doing, which is the legislative budget, oversight, state laws work. And in order to do that work well for what people need today, everyday working class folks really need our state government to be better. And I hear we have a lot of state employees that work and live in my district, and they know that the technology systems that we have really hampers the amount of services they can offer and the costs that it takes to run those services. And I bring a background that has modernized large organizations with technology. I bring a background that has worked to everyone across the political spectrum in multiple countries to actually solve problems. And I bring a background from my personal bio that says, I'm not really here to play party politics as much as party politics is a part of politics nowadays. I am here to find whatever solutions work. And my opponent is more on he has been in state government for a long time. Of all the stuff I've watched over the last 2 years, I haven't seen him bring a lot more new ideas, haven't seen him bring a lot of innovative ideas, and I've seen him vote party line all the time. And I think we need someone to really do the work of actually moving government to be more efficient and effective and better service all. And then the other part that no one talks about is in towns like ours, we're not big enough to have professional grant writers and whatnot. And there's a lot of state programs and grants out there that if our state rep could do a better job of helping connect our individual municipalities with the different programs and grants that are out there, then we can do a whole lot. And I sit on the Board of Education in Colchester, which I'm very proud of. We work very well bipartisanly, but Colchester is losing the most amount of money for educational cost share
Really?
of any town in the state of Connecticut, about $480,000 per year for 10 years. We had a trouble getting our middle school bonding closed out to get money that the state owes us back to our town municipality to pay down our debt service. When we reach out and call our elected officials, it was other Democrats who are willing to work with me to actually get that stuff through. And so we've been able to get $3.5 million back from the state because we got that logjam cleared up. It should have never existed in the first place, but things happen. And that's a role a state rep should be doing just as much as the legislative work. And it's clear that when folks in our towns need to get stuff done, the current incumbent isn't willing or responsive. I don't know why. He's a nice guy, but he isn't doing that sort of work, and it matters a lot to towns like ours.
Nice guy doesn't cut it when you need an effective legislator.
Results matter.
Right. So tell me, before we get to what you think are the important issues that are facing your district and Connecticut that you would work on once you got to Hartford, what are the people behind the doors in your calls, your house calls? What are they telling you is important to them?
The number one thing, once you get past the dynamics of the presidential race, and that can go either way depending on who you're talking to, is affordability. People are really struggling to make ends meet. Prices have gone up dramatically coming out of COVID. That isn't just a Connecticut problem. That isn't just a USA problem. That is a global problem. And prices aren't coming down fast enough. And we can talk about the nuances of average wage rates and how the stock market is doing and whatnot. I don't think it really matters as much as the perception at the door says, yeah, it's harder than it was a few years ago. And if you look at Eversource a couple weeks ago,
Oh, God.
raising their rates again and getting approved by PURA, which I'm sure we can talk about what we can do to fix that, it's another slam on people who are already stressed out. And this isn't just this past 2-year problem. This is a 50-year trend of the working class really getting harder and harder and harder to get by, while the major rich and larger corporations have never been richer, have never been more profitable. And that's just a dynamic that has to shift, and we can start that here.
We hope that the Democratic Party, through the presidential candidate, has a better economic goal and plan than we see from the Republicans. And yes, the perception is still that times are tough, but more than any other country in the world, we've come out of COVID more successfully. Although prices are still up, they are coming down. The inflation rate is down to like 2%. The Fed has just cut interest rates, and wages have gone up as well to help cover some of those costs. So I think the perception sometimes lingers beyond what the real facts behind them can be.
For sure. I would also argue, though, that while wages as a whole are gone up, not everyone's wages have gone up. So there are people that are certainly struggling. And it's also a psychological thing that's hard to put a number to, that you're used to paying a certain amount for a burger at McDonald's or whatever, and now it's more. And it's hard to overcome that perception. And I think you make a really good point, though, of our economy compared to the rest of the world has come out of COVID better than anyone else in the world. And I spent a few years in the Department of State, and I like looking at what other countries do to try to respond to these things, to take whatever lessons we can here in Connecticut or our country in general. And I think it's important to remember, and no one's really talking about this, the sort of right-wing agenda from us to Europe and others is pretty similar these days. And the UK tried to institute their economic right-wing agenda that would be very similar to what Trump would try to do, and they nearly imploded their economy in 24 hours. It's a dangerous idea. It's a dangerous set of philosophies. And if you think it's tough now, boy, I would be really worried about what their economic agenda would do.
We have seen, though, that the fascism that we were worried about may be coming more to Europe. It's lurking there, but some recent elections have overcome it. And I think that Great Britain is very upset that they did Brexit and left the European Union. I think they feel badly about that now. So I think you're right. We're kind of on the brink. What are we going to do in this country? Are we going to continue that fight against the fascistic future that, God forbid, could happen even here? Although, isn't it interesting? Most people say, when you say our democracy is in peril, they say, "Oh, come on, it's not true. They don't believe it. This is America. Why is our democracy?" Do you know what I mean? They minimize the actual risks that there might be.
Well, it's also fair, I think, for a lot of people, because if you brought up in the age I was and was told, look at all the amazing things America has done post Cold War and even during the Cold War, and a lot of that is true, but you also have to take it with a grain of salt, because we also had a lot of safety nets and safeguards in our system built into it that don't necessarily exist anymore because of recent Supreme Court rulings, because of just the people in the room will be very different. And a lot of our safeguards are just norms.
They're not written down anywhere. We expect people to behave in a certain way. There's expectations of normal behavior. And we've never had a situation where we have somebody who is flouting all those norms, and we can't believe it.
We can't believe it. We haven't experienced it here. Other countries have. And I think we can take lessons there. And I think at the end of the day, what it really boils down to, and Heather Cox Richardson is an American historian who wrote an amazing book called Democracy Awakenings. And in that book, she really highlights that we as a country have been here before too. And it's this battle between these two different philosophies, a philosophy that on one side, and I would argue on the current Trump right side of the political spectrum, you have this philosophy that we should just use government to support the billionaires and the people who are just smarter and more talented, who can build a better economic future everyone could prosper from. This is the basic underlying philosophy of trickle-down economics from the Reagan era. It's a philosophy that we knew was wrong all the way back then, but keep going back to it.
It's socialism for the rich and capitalism for the poor.
That's exactly it. The other side of that is you have a philosophy that says, actually, if you use the power of government to support the middle class with good education, good social safety benefits, and still have capitalism, we're not trying to run away from capitalism by any stretch of the imagination, but whenever government is making rules, if those rules benefit working class folks, everyone is better off. The rich will still be better off, the poor will be better off, the middle class will actually grow for the first time in decades. And every time, whether it's the 1850s, the 1920s, we can point out a few different times in American history, the American people has always chosen, let's support working class folks again. And it has always got us out of the mess that trickle-down economics gets us into.
Yeah, well, you're preaching to the choir. What happened in 2008?
Right.
Obama had to dig us out of the mess that Bush left. What happened in 2020? Biden had to help us dig out of the mess that Trump left. So,
yeah.
And it goes on and on. And okay, so let's go back to your race. And
yeah, let's bring it back to Connecticut.
Let's bring it back to what we can do on a local level. And I see your overarching philosophy, which is a democratic philosophy of government, probably, right?
Yeah.
So let's go to the PowerPoint that we have that we can talk about Chris's background and what he wants to do. So here we are. Let's see. Can we show the first slide? So yeah, Chris, you talk about how your whole life has been focused on public service. Why don't you just give a little extra information on this slide?
Sure, happy to. So when I say my whole life is about public service, I started in my hometown that I grew up here in Connecticut, being an EMT, serving through our church that I grew up in, and through Boy Scouts. I'm an Eagle Scout, which is heavily dedicated to public service. And I thought at that time, I just wanted to help people. And so I thought I wanted to become a doctor. So I got my EMT certification through Naugatuck Valley Community College when I was still in high school, and ended up enlisting in the Army, the National Guard, I should say, shortly after September 11th. And right when I finished high school, they ended up deploying me to Operation Iraqi Freedom 3.
Okay, let's go to the next slide because I think that talks about that. Oh, well, this is good. So you can show that. Is that your
Yep.
district in the white area?
That is my district in the white area. It's a lot of geographic area to cover compared to most other districts.
Okay.
Perfect. So, yep, we're getting back to my story. And so that part of this slide ends with my deployment to Operation Iraqi Freedom 3, where I spent some time in Kuwait, spent some time in Iraq. And that was my first real eye-opening, having been a lower income person growing up here in Connecticut who has been part of amazing communities, whether it's my church community or just my local town I grew up in, and all of a sudden having my eyes opened. And you take that forward, took my SATs in Kuwait, applied for and got into West Point, which really is a pivotal changing point of my life. Met my wife there and studied physics and nuclear engineering. And I'm sure we'll talk about electricity prices, and nuclear is a part of that story here in Connecticut. And then after West Point, I was an Army engineer in Afghanistan, led about 150 combat missions, and used those leadership skills to come back to the US, became a data scientist. And then once I finished being a data scientist in the Army wearing a uniform, I went to grad school at Georgetown, got a master's in public policy, got a master's in international relations.
Was that a goal that you had for? How did your trajectory of what you wanted to do when you were in high school, then in college? How did it proceed to the point where you did all of those degrees?
So the one North Star I've always had is just wanting to help other people. That has never shifted. And when I was in Afghanistan, I was leading a route clearance mission. So that's driving around trying to find the IEDs that are buried in the roads. and one of my trucks got blown up 3 days into a month-long mission. And so I spent the next 25 to 27 nights in the Afghan countryside at night thinking, how do we end up here? Why are we still here 10 years into this conflict? And I realized at that time, I didn't really know how my government worked. I didn't really know what was putting my life on the line. And I was trying to answer my soldiers' questions and realized I didn't really like the answers I was giving. And so I just decided there and then in the middle of Afghanistan that whatever the future brought, I wanted to study it. I wanted to understand it better. And then when the Army brought me to the Pentagon to be a data scientist, and that's where I got out of the Army from while my wife, who is also a West Point grad, was still serving in the DC area. Georgetown, honestly, all the schools in DC are phenomenal for studying government because you get access to a lot of leaders. And so you get to study it, and then you get to get mentors like Madeleine Albright, who recently passed away, or on the other side of the aisle, Chuck Hagel and others, and you get to pick their brains of the lessons they learned.
These are secretaries of state that you worked
Right.
with.
Yeah.
So I guess the question would be, you had all of that national experience in diplomacy and Secretary of State work.
Yeah.
Why didn't you decide to stay working at national level? And then I guess the other question is, how did that experience on the national level, how does that help inform what you can do on the local level now?
Yeah. So the reason why I didn't stay is because of how much time you have to put in to really make a difference at the federal level. When you're working in the Pentagon, the Pentagon itself is 6 times or so the size of the district I'm trying to represent. To make anything happen in the Pentagon.
How many employees does the Pentagon have? Millions, right?
Well, the military has millions.
Yeah.
The Pentagon itself, we can Google it. There's probably 60,000-ish in that building alone, or in its nearby units. But it's a large bureaucracy, and you have to spend decades and decades there to be able to be at a position where you can really make a difference, which is impactful because of the scale it's at, but boy, you have to put in a lot of time. And so when my wife got out of the military and we were figuring out what we wanted to do with our lives, I wanted to come home to Connecticut to make a difference, and wanted to do it at the local level because there's plenty of really, truly brilliant, smart people in DC who are working on national issues. There are think tanks, there's an entire apparatus behind it. And then you start to learn about government is both at our municipality level and at our state level, there's not a huge deep bench of people who are really eager to go work their butts off for almost no pay or sometimes no pay, and to actually, you can do a lot more because you just don't have all the dynamics that you have at the national level.
So what lessons did you learn about government in DC that you can now apply to being a state rep here in Connecticut?
So I learned 3 things. One, the value of process. So none of us are experts on everything you're going to encounter, and having a process for taking in more information, having a process for making decisions, and having the government having clear processes that people can understand matters a ton. The outcome will be really, really good if you have a really, really good process. Process matters. 2, don't silo yourself. Don't only get feedback from folks who agree with you. And one of the benefits of being a military veteran, I have friends and acquaintances from all sides of the political spectrum. I talk to everyone. I think I understand what's behind a lot of the Trump movement at the local level, and that's people feeling like their government isn't working for them. And I talk to folks who will still vote for Trump no matter what I tell them, as much as I try to advocate otherwise. And it's just, don't take it personally, just keep at it and just keep refining what you view. And part of that is always being surrounded by smart people that disagree with you can have conversations with. And it's one thing I think we lost, is the ability to disagree without being disagreeable. And then the third thing is, everyone talks about the different levels of government in silos. When you're at town politics or municipal elections, you'll talk about what your town can do. When you're running for state office, we're going to talk a lot about what our state can do. When you're in DC or you're talking to congressmen and women, or anyone else at the federal level, they'll only talk about what the national level can do. The reality is our federal system is a partnership all throughout. Towns like ours can't do as much as what we want to do without state support, and vice versa. We don't need the state coming in and micromanaging us either. The state of Connecticut is the largest net tax exporter to DC. Like, we should have a pretty good say in how our federal money is spent. But when we need it, when we have emergencies, we also need that federal support to come back here. And
So
we
you
need
see the
federal government.
interconnections between all the levels of government, and
Yeah.
you think you have the ability to make those connections and to outreach to all the different groups that you need.
Absolutely. And I think that's one thing I bring to the table that my opponent doesn't. And why does it matter here? Well, if you don't think national security really matters and the Army, Navy, Marines, and Air Force, Space Force, Coast Guard can just take care of it, well, we make nuclear submarines here. We have a lot of people that live in our town that is part of that. And so those nuclear submarines helps keep us all safe. It's a good thing for our country. But they also need workforce training programs that could be heavily funded by the state. And then we need to get students started earlier so they can understand, career in the trades is just as good as a 4-year degree. And so we need to get those into our high schools, which is all municipal government. And we need all those 3 pillars to work together so that people can have futures they could be proud of right here at home.
Okay, let's go back to the slides, see what the next one is. Let's see. Here are some core goals. This is just the beginning. Drive innovation in Hartford so we can get more for less. Why don't you expand on that?
So what happens an awful lot of time in government is the technology that underpins the work we're doing, whether it's social services, whether it's Department of Transportation, whatever you think of, or even our tax system is archaic. Most of them date back to the 90s. And the amount of time that goes into, from a staff perspective or from a state employee perspective, to make those systems actually work means less time that they have to support the actual taxpayer and whatever issue they have. And I think it's well past time that we really look across our entire state government and modernize technology to catch up to where we're living in 2024 and make it ready for future technologies that are coming. So that's,
and how can you do that as a state legislator?
2 ways. The biggest way is funding for it. So the reason why these systems are dating back to the 90s is we always kind of fund state government at whatever the current services is. And then if you want to advocate, if you're a state agency and want a new technology system, you're going to have to tell the state legislature most of the time, I'm going to bring that system on when I'm taking this system off, and I'm not allowed to overlap because they want to keep the budget as flat as possible. The reality is change takes money. And so we need to have a technology innovation fund to allow our state government to modernize while they're still providing services.
And then how do you develop the prioritization of your towns in your district need X, Y, Z, but you want to have more money for the innovative technology for the state? How do you balance all of that?
So there's a few different ways you can balance it. One is kind of looking at how much potential for actually improving people's lives is there and how likelihood is that going to be. That's kind of just retooling a risk mitigation strategy that the Army has used since World War II. And it'll be a better process for having that real debate in the state legislature. Right now, way too often, it's down to the individual ability of that particular legislature to advocate for things and what committees they sit on and whatnot. And that's where I go back to, we need a much better process, and we need a process to look at what will the real impact be and where can we prioritize, because we can't afford everything at once. But boy, the things that impact people's lives, things that impact their safety, that should be priority number 1. And then we'll fit in everything else as we can go.
Okay, let's go back to the second item that was on your list. Find successful ways to support schools, businesses, and first responders in the post-pandemic recovery. Okay, how can you do that as a state legislature?
So it's important to note we're not done with the recovery yet. COVID feels like a long time ago. Businesses, schools, first responders are all still struggling with their workloads. Businesses are struggling in sometimes a good way to find people to hire at different wage points. And schools are struggling to catch students up to the learning loss because our students who are currently in our K through 12 school systems have lived through COVID unless you're the youngest of learners. And there, I think we need a combination of support from our state government. For education, it's things like more funding for special education, more funding for social emotional learning, and more funding for towns like ours that are losing the most in the educational cost share. Those are 3 specific legislative goals I would have. For small businesses, we need to get our regulations not to be big or small. We need them to be smart. And we need them to be more regulations for the bigger companies, for the monopolies that we have like Eversource, and less regulations for the small companies, the mom and pop diners and the people who are selling eggs and whatnot.
A lot of people going into business, trying to become entrepreneurs, find a morass of regulations so overwhelming. How would you try to work on that?
I think we need to, and I think the state legislature should pass a law that basically says, hey, state government, we will reward trimming down and streamlining your regulations and actually modernizing them with more funding for the programs that everyone in our agencies have, a handful of programs that they would love to do if they could afford to do it. And I think that we can certainly say, hey, if you're willing to actually do the hard work and come up with a comprehensive plan on how you can better execute your mission, whatever that is, for less, then we'll match you with the cost savings you'll have with the funding for the things you want. And I think that will change the incentive structure throughout our government.
So you describe your district as having a lot of rural, some farmland, and also having a kind of suburban feel to it and small businesses. How would you help create more friendlier small business environment for the towns in your district?
I think one of the things important to remember is farms are also businesses. And there's a lot we can do to support our farmers to allow them to get more of their products into our local grocery stores. We can do more to get their products directly to consumer without necessarily having to go through grocery stores. And I think at the end of the day, our small businesses, we need to look at the entire life cycle of their business and make sure that we're meeting them with the support they need. They have to register with the Secretary of State's office if you're an entrepreneur and starting a business. Right now, it's a lot of different clicks, a lot of different forms, a lot of different things. That should be one click, one-stop shopping. Truly, let's stop talking about it. Let's actually do that, and not just from a funding perspective in the state legislature, but getting on those committees and being oversight and asking the targeted questions, because I've done this before for clients. And sometimes our state employees who genuinely across the board are amazing people, are experts in what they're experts in. They're generally not experts in bringing in new technology. And I think I can bring that to the conversation for the sort of strategic executive level conversation. So that's starting a business, owning the business. I think we need more workforce training programs so that employers, small businesses in particular, who maybe can't afford the sort of training programs that Electric Boat and others can afford, can still get access to the talent that they need. And then once businesses are up and running, then I think our state government should do a whole lot more to advertise them. To the benefit of being a small state is folks from New York, Massachusetts, Rhode Island, Maine, Florida can all come here and enjoy our small businesses, and we need to do a better job with tourism.
Okay, let's go back to see what the third item is: support farmers and protect open space to preserve our special character. How can we do that at the legislature?
So for that one in particular, I'm a Boy Scout at heart. I grew up in the outdoors. I love everything about the outdoors, and we need to protect our environment more. We have a lot of amazing farmlands, and the thing I was really disappointed about running 2 years ago is our state legislature main proposal they were trying to do was to help farmers start retirement accounts and that the state could match funding. I'd be happy to support it. I don't think that really addresses the main problem. The average age for a Connecticut farmer is already over 65. They're already over retirement age. So I think our state government needs to look at how do you create programs that allow new generation of farmers to come in, because it's not, the chance that your farm is going to be passed down to your kids and their kids and their kids and their kids forever doesn't always work out for a whole bunch of different reasons. And when that happens, I think we need more state programs to allow the zoning and whatnot to break up farms to be able to be used by smaller scale farmers so that they can start their careers. And I think that there's a lot we can do there with our state programs, because there's a lot of state programs with farming that people don't understand. And I've been lucky enough to sit down with a few farmers, and they educated me about all the different agricultural policies. But the biggest thing is getting the new generation of farmers access to land, because you shouldn't have to be a millionaire to be a farmer.
Interesting. Okay, let's go back to number 4. Let's see what that. Ensure that veterans have access to the benefits they deserve. Okay.
So this is one of those ones that's typically just a talking point for most politicians, and certainly on the Republican side of the aisle, they typically talk about it and do the opposite. This one's easy for me. I am a veteran. We have a relatively new veteran center in Norwich that serves the region. It's probably the best kept secret, which I would like to have it not be a secret anymore.
Where is it in Norwich?
It's not far from Dodd Stadium.
Okay.
And it has an amazing set of services. It's the first of its kind in our state, I believe, and we should do more to support that and get the word out on that. And then in addition, I think just like we do with seniors, veterans deserve tax breaks when it comes to property taxes. We do a little bit of it. I think we should do more. And then, here in Eastern Connecticut, we have the largest population of veterans, yet our federal resources of the VA, hospitals and whatnot tend to be in Central Connecticut.
Right.
We need more satellite offices and more of a
I was interested to
opportunity.
hear that statistic from Congressman Courtney that we have per capita-wise, the largest select collection of veterans in Eastern Connecticut of the whole state. Yeah, interesting. Okay, and let's see what the last one was. Secure state funding so our community gets its fair share. Now, why isn't it getting its fair share now?
I would argue it's not getting its fair share because the unspoken job of the state rep is to be a grant champion for our local towns. And if you look at Colchester alone, the one I have firsthand experience with, it was me as a volunteer Board of Ed member who went and advocated and pushed for and ushered through a grant for a HVAC system for a high school. So we're getting $780,000 worth of state money to fix a HVAC system that is 30 years old and never fully air conditioned the entire school. We will now be able to do that because we got that grant. And it's one thing that isn't just applying for, it's these technology systems are really archaic and sometimes the things fall through the cracks, and just constantly calling and following up on it is how we got that money. It's getting the $3.5 million back from the state for our WJ construction that our past administrations in our town should have taken care of, never did. And because it was so delayed, that the state should have charged us a 10% fee, which would have meant a fee from the state of $2.5 million. Instead, called up folks across the state and actually picked up the phone and called them, not just send off a single email, but follow up and get that moving again. And part of that was our town financial department should have been more forward leaning and tracking that, but also the state changed software programs and that's how that got dropped. And so we need a state rep to do more of that sort of work. And that's how you can go from a $2.5 million fee that you're gonna have to pay to actually getting $3.5 million back to our town, money that our town spent anyways. And it's just making sure we're leveraging our state programs as well as they could be leveraged.
Okay. Let's look at the last two slides that we have. I think they're nice photos. So there you are with your wife, and she was also in the military, as you said.
That's right. She's also a West Point grad. She's still in the Army Reserves, and we served together for a while on active duty.
And what kind of dog is that?
So that is Ray, our Australian cattle dog, who actually recently passed away about 2 months ago. Right, not too much after that.
And that's Chris Rivers, state representative. I think that's that last slide. Yeah. Okay, so I asked you before the show to give me what the top 5 things you wanted to work on. Now you covered some of them in your discussions, but I'll just go over them again, and you can add whatever things you want to to that. Your number one, again, because of what you heard at the doors, making Connecticut more affordable. This should start with utility rates across the state, given recent price increases. You want to expound further on that?
Happy to. I think the thing that's important to notice here, or the thing that's important to know here for anyone watching this, is Eversource rate increases doesn't need to be the way forward. And the reason why I say that is this dates back to the 90s, this actual issue. We in Connecticut gave up our regulated utilities, and we basically allowed a private company to become a monopoly in our state. That's not necessarily the end of the world. You can certainly do that. But the problem is the oversight for that monopoly is an agency called PURA, the Public Utility Regulatory Agency. That agency, I think, needs more authority from the state legislature. They need more people to sit on that agency. Right now, it's just 3 people, 2 of whom, 1 Democrat, 1 Republican, who typically vote for whatever Eversource wants. We should have 5 more people on that are all consumer friendly, that can actually advocate for the consumer. The big picture though, the real big problem that no one wants to talk about, and you're probably not gonna see on any mailers, we don't make enough electricity here in Connecticut.
No.
We have one big power plant, that's a nuclear power plant that makes about 40% of our electricity. Virtually everything else comes in from a pretty long ways off. And most of that is natural gas, and you have to pay for transmission fees, whatnot. The real answer long-term as an engineer is we need to make more electricity here.
Okay. Your number 2 top things you wanted to work on, making Connecticut more equitable. You said we live in one of the most unequal states at the most unequal time in history. Things like unfunded mandates hurt towns like ours in my district, and it has to stop. It needs to start with a more fair tax system. Let's talk about that.
Yeah, so I think 2 major points here, really. The more fair tax system. Working class folks pay something in the 30% range, depending on the specifics of your tax situation. The wealthiest of Connecticut residents pay a fraction of that in taxes. We need to close tax loopholes. We need to get the super rich who live here in Connecticut and enjoy everything that is there to enjoy about Connecticut. They should be paying an equal rate of what working class folks are paying. And then you can actually give middle class and working class folks a pretty sizable tax decrease and not lose anything from a budget perspective. So that's item number 1. Item number 2 is the unfunded mandate part. And I'll give you a very specific Colchester example. The state legislature passed an unfunded mandate that says every school district across the state will do an analysis of their air quality. And I get why they're doing it. I'm all for improved air qualities in our schools. But because there was no funding attached to it, Colchester was going to have to try to find about $70,000 that we didn't account for in our budgeting process. Thankfully, the legislature got some feedback. They pushed out the deadline for it. We're still going to have to find that money. But it's the special education mandates. Again, I'm all for special education and having as good a special education as we can. But if you're going to tell towns what to do, give them the resources to go do it. We can't keep finding more money to do these sort of special projects without the state support.
And other communities, because the school funding is based on the property tax system, other communities have the funds to do these things that we may not in Eastern Connecticut.
Yeah, and I'll just call it out by name. If you live in Darien, Greenwich, Avon, finding an extra $70,000, not a problem.
Right.
In fact, some PTOs said, hey, just ask your parents for it. In Colchester, Boswell, Franklin, and Lebanon, our parents are already struggling in a mighty good way for the future of their kids. We don't have the sort of resources to just ask our parents for it.
Okay. Your 3rd priority, working as state rep, you said making Connecticut government a model, modernization, technology, smart regulations. We need to balance the role government plays to shape the market and protect people with businesses need to operate. We need more government to protect against big business and less around small businesses.
Yeah, so this is this entire idea that regulation and the current debate around regulation, more or less, whatever, is really missing the mark in my opinion. We need smart regulation. I've said it a few times already now, but Eversource is a perfect example to beat up on at the moment. They're a monopoly in the vast majority of the state. They're also increasing their prices at the same time where municipal utilities are lowering rates. And they're making record profits. And I did the calculation because one of our fellow Colchester residents reached out to my opponent and really did not get any answers. And this was months and months ago. So I started researching it. The average Connecticut homeowner is spending on utilities 200 days out of the year is just going to Eversource's profits. That's where we need more regulation. We need more regulation for companies like Amazon and their labor practices, more regulations for companies like Walmart who uses government subsidies to subsidize their own profits. That's where we need more useful and effective regulation. And we need to get government out of our mom and pop restaurants and whatnot. Still have some minimum standards and whatnot, but we need to streamline it so it's easy for our small business owners to be able to navigate.
Okay. Your 4th priority, we should have the world's best education from preschool through college, but due to well-intentioned but short-sighted unfunded mandates, you already talked about that,
Yep.
and antiquated budget processes, towns like Colchester and others in your district struggle to provide the quality of education we'd like.
Yeah, and Colchester has been on the front line, and we've had rough budget battles at the municipal level for the last few years because of increases that we've had to have because of increase in cost. It's not fair to do that to our fellow residents in Colchester. And this is where I think state government can also come in. Unfortunately, they can come in and actually support towns like ours go through those pivotal time periods. Unfortunately, when they start adding on these unfunded mandates because individual legislatures have pet projects, but then they can't find the money and there's fiscal guardrails out there from the governor that is going to be a contentious issue this upcoming legislative session. It kind of leads to, well, we have this great intention, but we don't have the money, so let's try to do it from a state level without spending money on it. And then that just puts it back onto property taxes, which, by the way, is the most regressive tax system you could design. So the people who it impacts the most are typically on the lower end of the economic ladder. It's the working class folks who constantly just take it, and it's not helping anyone.
Yeah. And, fifth priority was towns like Colchester and others need an advocate for more resources. You want to be the kind of state rep, you already talked about this, who rolls up your sleeves and helps act as a grant manager for the towns.
Yeah, and this is something, even though the legislative session is only a few months out of the year, it's really a full-time job, in my opinion. And it's a full-time job to constantly be pinging those different state agencies. What are those deadlines? Let me get that information out to the various municipalities, get them help if they need it, even help them write language if helpful. And I've done that in Colchester. That's how we got $780,000 for the HVAC system. That's how we turned a $2.5 million fee into a $3.5 million reimbursement from the state. I can certainly do that for all 4 towns.
Okay. And finally, you said this is a bonus, and you are talking about the atmosphere of politics, problem-solving discussions that has been downgraded of recent years. You said we need to get our political debates back onto solving problems and less focus on the theater of it all. The theater approach causes damage regardless of what you believe, and problem-solving has to start with the facts. So you like to spend time educating folks what government is up to and how to change it.
That's it. And our current first selectman in Colchester does a great weekly newsletter that you can see what is actually going on in our town. I think our state rep should also have a weekly newsletter, should have office hours, should have way more availability to the public at large throughout the entire year. Knowing that's a lot to ask, but if you're going to ask for that position to make a difference, you owe it to people, in my opinion, to go talk to them. And not everyone will agree. That's part of the job.
So how will you structure it? Will you have listening hours? Will you go out in the community? Will you have a town hall setting? What kinds of things are you envisioning to bring information to the people and get information from the people?
So I'm envisioning a couple things. One, a weekly newsletter. That could be a two-way communication stream. It doesn't have to just be me blasting it out to folks. I will respond. 2, it's 4 towns I'm trying to represent. 1 week out of the month, every town should get an office hour, I think, at a bare minimum. And then 3, and I think what people in Colchester understand, when people reached out for issues with Board of Ed or other things, I go out of my way to go meet them for coffee. I am very much trying to be a politician who is trying to break that theater of it all. And whether you agree with me, disagree with me, I hope everyone votes for me. But even if you don't, I'm trying to do the best for you and want to talk to you. So if people have other ideas, I think I bring a pretty good background as an engineer, as a diplomat and whatnot, but I also want to keep hearing from people that disagree as well.
Okay, so now we're going to conclude. I'm going to give you the catch-all question. What is it that you want to say very much that you haven't had a chance to say right now? Anything?
I think at the end of the day, for anyone watching this, the biggest thing for this election, because you're going to hear a lot of big terms. You're going to hear democracy, freedom, a lot of big terms coming out of the federal campaigns. That's all important. It's also important that your voice is heard. It's important to go out and vote. In this particular election, you have more ways than ever. Starting October 21st, you can go early vote in any of our towns for the first time. You can absentee ballot still if you want to, if you can't make it to the polling locations. And then the actual day of the election is November 5th. And so for everyone watching this, I hope I have earned your support. And if not, please reach out and let's keep the conversation going.
Okay, great. And what's your website? Do you have a...
Yep, so my website is chrisrivers.com. And on there is also a contact me form that goes straight to me. It does not go to my staff. So you can put notes on there and send it straight to me and I'll read it and respond.
Okay, great. So thank you everyone for listening. Chris is one of the politicians we'll be having. You need to be educated as to what the issues are. You need to contact Chris. He's very open to talking to you, to having coffee. It's the 48th district. I'm sure if you're listening in this area in Connecticut, you're probably in it. Colchester, Lebanon,
Basra and Franklin.
And Franklin. And we'll see you next time on Talk. And don't forget, October 21st is early voting. Find out from your town exactly where the early voting location is. It may not be the exact same as your voting district on election day, but it would be great. Let's all vote early. Let's all make this the best attended election in history, okay? Thank you, Chris. Thank you all. See you next time on Talk Back. Bye.